Welcome back to another episode of Don't Waste the Chaos. Today, we have a truly dynamic guest that is seriously a pleasure to be around. Joining me is Brandy Spurling, the keynote speaker and founder of Sage Culture Company, an organization dedicated to transforming employee culture and team development. Brandy blends her master's in strategic leadership with her background in theater and stand-up comedy to create engaging, thoughtful, and fun experiences for her audiences. I was laying in bed this morning, listening to some Insta stories, letting them roll through. And my son, who's 12 years old, was laying beside me. Brandy popped up and I listened to her. And after I told my son, that's who I'm going to have on the pod today. And he said, that's going to be a good one. So if Brandy passes the cool test for a preteen boy, then you know that you're in for a treat. So in this episode, Brandy's going to take us through her journey of building a business that focuses on employee culture, sharing insights on how leadership plays a pivotal role in shaping a positive workplace environment. From defining the key elements of a strong organizational culture to navigating the challenges of improving team dynamics, Brandy offers a real-world piece of advice that's both actionable and very inspiring. So whether you're an HR pro or a business leader, this episode is packed with wisdom that can help you cultivate an empowered team and a vibrant workplace. So sit back and get ready for some insightful and probably humorous conversations about how you can build a thriving workplace culture. Brandy, welcome to the pod.
How fun. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. 13-year-old cool test? What in the world? Now I'm nervous about what I popped up with. Honestly, it could have been anything.
He could have said anything too. So I was like, when he was like, ooh, that's going to be a good one. I was like, okay. Yeah, Keegan knows. Keegan knows.
I mean, he's your son, so of course he's cool. Like, let's be honest.
So let's go ahead and jump in and give the people what they're here for. Let's start out by listening to some of your journey and what inspired you to open your own business, and then why the focus on employee culture.
So I got my master's in strategic leadership. I graduated with it in 2016, around 2016, 2017. And I went on to get that degree because I had been in 3 different work experiences. After getting my bachelor's degree, I worked in the home offices of Walmart and Sam's Club. I did higher education. I was in the financial industry. And I found that I wasn't necessarily fitting in some of those teams that I was working with. And it wasn't the work. I was very good at the work, but what I was finding was I was missing something with the leaders that I was working alongside. And I came out maybe expecting to learn quicker about what the working world was. I think I was really surprised at how quickly I was just expected to know how to exist in a team. And that wasn't necessarily my experience. You had to fail and learn the norms along the way. And so I got my master's in leadership, one, because I was free. I was like, this is cool. I love free things, let alone a degree. Let's go. And 2, I felt like I needed something else. I felt like I needed something to attach to my bachelor's in theater. I also got my bachelor's in Spanish, which telenovelas weren't like really looking for me at that point. I don't think, I don't think I was a good fit for that. So in my master's, what I really started to dive into was this idea of company culture, and even more so company culture with intergenerational conflict and intergenerational challenges, rather, because that was in 2016. Millennials were the peak conversation point at that point. So I graduate with my master's. I go on and I actually found myself at the Chamber of Commerce in Columbia, and I was booking a lot of keynote speakers around leadership. So we were having a lot of conversations around women in leadership, and I got to sit in all of those rooms, and I felt like I was learning a lot, but I was also fueling my confidence for what I had learned in my master's and my unique perspective that I had. And so I ended up getting hired in a learning and development role and loved it. I was there for 4 years. And that's all I did was I talked about leadership. I talked about creating cool teams. Like, how do we work better together? How do we navigate conflict together? How do we build trust together? And I loved every second of it. Genuinely found myself in a position that I never dreamed would fit so well for me. And like 4 years after I got hired, I really just wanted adventure, to be honest with you. I started this company because I loved what I was doing. And I was like, I want more adventure in my life. I didn't want to be in an office 24/7. I felt like I kind of reached the peak of what I could do in the organization that I was in and decided I wanted to be able to do what I was doing in that company for other companies, for other small businesses, for other organizations that didn't have a staff to bring those culture conversations to their people. And so that's why I started Sage Culture Co. That's it. I did it because I wanted to start cool conversations. I wanted to wear a lot of green. I look really good in that color. That's why I called it Sage. That was it. There was no like brilliant idea to this. But that's it. So I did it. And I've been doing it now for a year and a half. She'll turn 2 years old in March of 2024 or 2025, excuse me.
Oh, so we're on really close. So you started in March and I started in April. So I'll always be able to remember your anniversary. That's awesome.
I know.
It's really exciting. So I love hearing you talk about bringing it to small businesses because you're right. Like just similar to my consulting work, a lot of times small businesses, whether it's a CFO or somebody focused on ops or someone focused on culture, they can't necessarily afford or they're not prioritizing to spend the money in that area, but they need it. Yeah. Especially, if they've got more than 3 people, they've got a team. I mean, shoot, 2 people's a team, but you know what I mean? Like as they're growing, they are impacting these people's lives. And so it is important. And I love that with you, they could do, I'm assuming one-time spend. Can they do reoccurring spend? Like, how does that work to get into a relationship with you?
Yeah. So they do one-time spend. They do reoccurring. Honestly, a lot of the relationships with me come from, actually, I'm not going to say a lot, 100% have come from people that have seen me. So I'm a keynote speaker, which means I'll attend conferences. I get booked by events, organizations to come in and speak on a topic. And I've been really, really lucky these last, I shouldn't say lucky. I'm talented at what I do, which means there's a repercussion of that. And the repercussion is that whenever people come to work with me, they know what they're getting already. So a lot of the times our work gets to be really intentional and customized that I don't necessarily have. There's not a lot of conversations around if, it's how. And so sometimes the how looks like we do a leadership training and then from there we do a full company training, or sometimes it means we do 3 full company trainings sparsed out over 3 months. But my ultimate goal is whenever we answer, like, how are we going to do this? It's going to be, what's the way that we need to do it for this information to stick? Some companies feel really confident with one keynote and action items on the other side with their leaders, conversation starters with their teams. Some companies, whenever we say, how is it going to stick? They're like, you know what? I think it's going to stick better if our leaders have the content first, and then we train our people on the other side. So at the end of the day, I'm open to however we need to do it, but it has to be very specific to what their people need in order for this work to actually matter. So that way I'm not just money being thrown. They could hire me. I can come in and make people laugh all day long, but I mean, that's beneficial, but what's more beneficial is if there's change on the other side.
Yeah. And I love that you're asking that question because I do think and this is no knock on keynote speakers, but, I think there's a lot of times where, people come in and they show up and they present beautifully and then they walk away. And so I love hearing you say that you've got like a vested interest in that company for them to retain and grow from that. I could probably just talk to you for hours on end because I love that you freaking circled back and gave yourself some credit for what you've built for yourself. Like, yes to that. I feel like as women, so often we have to be like, or we put on ourselves to say, oh, I'm just so grateful that somehow I've accidentally stumbled into it. It's like, okay, I am grateful, but it's because I built this for myself because I've given myself credibility. So like, good for you. Props to you for saying that.
It's hard. I mean, I don't feel like we always get a lot of people showing us a lot of examples in that world. So it is hard, but I think more than anything, I don't do that for other people. I have to do it for me, because if I don't say, no, I'm talented, and I just say, oh, I got lucky. Then I start believing that it's only luck. And the reality is luck can be a part of any game, but it's never going to be the whole story. So there's something I did in there that I need to remember so that the next time I get an opportunity, it's the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, I'm talented. That's why I got that opportunity, not because I'm lucky, which I am lucky,
Yeah,
but that's not why I'm getting them.
right. Maybe the first time, but you don't
Maybe.
keep getting something on luck. That's for
Yes.
sure. Yeah, I actually love
Yes.
that. So, what do you believe are the key elements that would define a strong org culture in an organization?
This is, man, I feel like the reason why I started talking is because culture can just feel so gray. Like, we say culture and then we're like, oh, wow, that's, snacks. That's whatever. And whenever I talk about culture, I talk about a couple of feelings that we can feel on the other side, but it also has to come into something super tangible that we can actually see and then we can actually make decisions on. And so the feelings that I would say that really strong and cool cultures elicit is that everyone feels safe. So everyone feels psychologically safe to share ideas. They feel safe to give and get feedback with love and care. We're not holding ourselves back from this interpersonal fear that we often have of, am I good enough to do something? Does this person trust me? What does their feedback mean? So we're safe. We can take all of those questions out and we can just exist really intentionally together, trust each other, give and get feedback, share ideas, question, speak up whenever there's mistakes. There's that psychological safety. And then the second one is that we have to feel seen. We have to feel like people see us for who we are. We have to feel like I'm an individual as well as a professional working. And that means people knowing what my strengths are, people using my strengths, people knowing where I want to grow, where I want to go, what is my hope for this position. And that a lot of the time isn't just on us as coworkers, but it's leaders. So making sure my leader sees me. And then the last one is connected. I have to feel connected in some way in a healthy culture. I need to feel connected to people. I need to feel connected to the mission, the vision, the values, the work. There has to be connection in there for healthy cultures. Otherwise, that's like a transactional culture. If we're not safe and seen and connected, we're all running and we may be running to the same thing, but we're getting there in very unhealthy and unsafe ways. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. You mentioned essentially the employer knowing the strengths and the opportunities for growth in an employee. What's a way that you recommend assessing that? Do you use a behavioral assessment or is it through one on one conversations? How do you recommend that happen?
So a lot of the companies that I come in with, that's one of the first questions I ask is, do you all use something already? I've worked with companies that use DISC. I've worked with companies that use predictive index. I've seen that you're doing some predictive index. Love it. I've seen strengths finders. Really, it's not necessarily that there has to be a specific tool. There just has to be a conversation in my mind. As a leader, I think one of the things that I experienced in my leaders so often was that there wasn't always this shared vision of like what I was good at, or they weren't helping me see what I was good at. So I think a lot of those conversations, they can be started by those tools. They can be started by strength finders, predictive index, but it doesn't have to be those things. It can just be simply you and I, Kerri, you going, Brandy, like, what strengths do you feel like you have? And then I say, here's what I think I have. And then you go, can I tell you what I think I have? Or what I think you have? I think that you're really good at XYZ. I don't know if you've seen it, but I see it, and here's how it impacts your work on the other side. You should do more of that. Those conversations are so simple to have. We don't have to have a full tool. Tools make it easier because it gives us all the same shared language, but we don't have to have a tool to be able to identify a strength in someone. We just have to feel really confident in saying it. We don't say it enough to each other, I don't think, especially
Yeah.
leaders.
What a
I've been
powerful
missing that.
conversation.
Yes. You haven't
It's
always had
so
it, have you?
beautiful. No, oh my goodness. And, whether it's a leader who's just like not skilled in that area to know how to do that, or a leader who's insecure and maybe they don't get it. And so they're not going to give it.
Yes.
Either way, leaders can't make that an excuse, right? Like we can't be unskilled when it comes to that. And we also can't be so insecure that we can't lift up our people. Like we shouldn't be in the leadership seat if that's the case.
Hmm.
I
I
mean,
had a
tough
keynote.
news, but it's true.
Have you read that book Reboot by Jerry Colonna?
No.
It's so that book is one that I instantly think of that whenever we think of, how are we impacted as leaders and how does it show up as a leader? So how am I impacted as an individual and then how does it come into like my leadership style? I think so often we have leaders walking around that haven't dealt with their own stuff. Like if I cussed on this podcast, I probably would have said a different word.
Do it.
Shit. We'll have our own shit.
Yes.
That we don't deal with. We don't deal with it. And if we don't deal with it, and if we don't ask ourselves, like, what am I missing? What might I be needing? We get really comfortable with measuring what other people need and get based on what we need and get. And if I don't get something, then me as a leader, I maybe don't realize I'm supposed to give it to my team, or maybe I'm frustrated, or I let it seep into my other relationships, and then we just let it spiral down. And I think that every single leader has to get really comfortable in healthy cultures asking, what do I need to feel safe, seen, and connected? And how can I make sure to give that to my team, even if I might not be receiving it? Like, that's how we break the mold.
I love that. That's part of the reason why. And actually, I know we've got a mutual connection, Kelly Howe, and you did great on her podcast. I love Kelly's podcast. I love listening to you on there. Folks, you have to go listen to Brandy's episode on Kelly Howe's podcast. But that's part of the reason why I started working with her. After working in corporate for 20 years, there were a lot of things that I did to survive or succeed. You know, some days it was survival, and then some days it was absolutely like blowing the doors off, succeeding. Either way, there are habits that I took on and just parts of my personality that I either suppressed or let out that won't serve me in this next season of entrepreneurship. It just won't. And it's also not the person I want to be long term. And so I've done a lot of talk therapy, but I'm doing tapping now. I'm working through EFT, and I look forward to Kelly sharing her knowledge because she's helping me get some breakthroughs that are just astronomical with my central nervous system. And the work is worth it. It's hard work, but it's so worth it.
I love Kelly. I tap with her too. I feel like tapping, I could talk all day long about tapping. It changed I started tapping in 2017, I think, and it's fully changed my life. 100% has changed my life. But yeah, I think that there's this idea as leaders that we just have to have it all together all the time, that we have to know what we're doing. We have to, just grind through, whenever reality is like a leader is a person too. A leader needs all of the things that their teammates need. It's just that they are not necessarily always in the seat of giving it to themselves, but they are in the seat of giving it to their team. And so how can we have both? How can you still have needs, honor those needs, honor the things that we're not getting, but then also not let it get in the way of how you show up for your team? And that's a hard balance.
It is, but one we, as a leader, we're committed to working on, or at least we should be.
Yes, 100%.
So how do you assess and measure? You're coming into a new organization. How would you assess and measure the current culture of that organization?
So I use a system that we created. So it's a Venn diagram is what we say really is our basis for what do we see as missing? What do we have? Where do we want to go? And that Venn diagram is 3 circles. And one of them is, what are our mission and values? Not only the ones that are on the walls, but what's important here? What do we think is important? What matters to us here? And then the second circle is, what are the systems and processes that we have that reinforce what we say matters? So if we say feedback matters here, then we would look and say, okay, what systems and processes do we have to reinforce that we say feedback matters? Is it that we're doing 360 reviews with our teams? Is it that we're doing a performance review every four months? Do we have one-on-ones with our leaders, and all of your leaders know that they should be asking for feedback in their one-on-ones? What's the avenue that we're telling our people, we say feedback matters, and here's how you can give it. Here's how you can start delivering it. And then the last circle is our accountability. That's where we own it. So that's where the people exist. So we say what matters. We show people how to do it with systems and processes. And then we have to create really solid accountability on the other side. So that's, what do we do when we don't see the thing that we say matters? What's our next step? And the reason why I start with that is we can often say, okay, if we just got a group of leaders in a room and we said, what is the culture we would want to see? What's the good things that we have now? Where do we want to go? We can put up lists of behaviors. Is it that we navigate conflict well? Is it that we navigate feedback? Is it that we trust each other? What is it? Like, let's put some words to it. And then whenever we do that, we really quickly probably could list out 8 different behaviors, and then leaders can go and they can plot them in this Venn diagram. Well, we say it, but we don't necessarily have a system and process for it. Or we say it and there's a system and process, but we're really crappy at holding people accountable for whatever we say matters. And so I feel like that's a really cool picture most often for companies because it's a snapshot of what our culture looks like, but it's also a snapshot of where we want to go with the culture. And it shows you what's missing. It shows you, okay, if we say we want feedback, but we don't have really any systems and processes for delivering feedback, then my suggestion is we should probably do a company-wide training on how to give and get feedback because we can't just expect people to know how to do it. So I use that as a way to say, what do we do right now? What's making up our culture? And then what would our culture look like if we could just wave a magic wand and say, this is what it is now?
Yeah, that's good. I love that. And plus, I love that visual representation. Some folks can hear the words, some folks can read the words, and some people need to see the words. So I love that. So I know you've mentioned being a keynote speaker. I love seeing your kind of day in the life stuff. You guys all make sure to link Brandy's social media because it's super fun to watch. I mean, I love learning about what other people's careers look like. And so it's inspiring to me. I love that. But you're doing this pretty often. What's your favorite topic? I know it probably, has a lot of variability, so you don't have to do just totally one, but what's your favorite topic to speak on right now? Like, what do you get the most jazzed about when you're like, oh my gosh, this would help. I want to talk to you about this.
I read, you kind of gave me an idea of what these questions would be. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be so hard to answer. It really is so hard to answer because I think I love all of them so much, depending on what I'm talking, depending on the group that I'm talking about. I love talking about imposter syndrome because it's something that I think we take for granted as, oh, it's just an individual problem. But reality is so many people experience imposter syndrome. So many people experience confidence issues, and it's impacting our cultures because we second guess ourselves. We take ourselves out of runnings. We create these stories in our head about what people might be thinking about us, and then it seeps into relationships. Imposter syndrome impacts so many things. So I love talking about that. But I think I would probably have to say I speak on generational differences a lot. And it's the keynote that makes me the most nervous. Genuinely, that's such a nerve-wracking keynote because it comes with such everybody's always fired up about this topic because we all have these feelings about Gen Z, we all have these feelings about millennials, fill in the blank. And so it's the one that's hardest for me to do, but it's also so rewarding, I think, on the other side. In fact, someone told me, I can't remember if I told you this or not. Someone told me in 2016 or 2017 when I was working at the chamber, I called this person that had a knowledge of someone we were looking at to speak on generational differences. And this was a leader in our community. And she said, Brandy, why are you asking that person to speak on it? Didn't you just do your thesis on that topic for my master's degree? And I was like, well, yeah. And they said, well, why don't you do the keynote? Shouldn't you? You should do the keynote. And I instantly, Kerri, I was like, no, I can't do that. I'm not qualified enough to do that. I don't know enough about that to do that. And she was like, didn't you just research it for 2 years? I was like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean anything, And so I didn't do it. I did not do it. And fast forward, 6 months later, I was asked to do it at a bank in Columbia. And I said yes. And that was the start of my learning and development career, was saying yes to a little 30-person workshop on generational differences. And I got to do one of 1,500 people in April, which was a full circle moment for me. So that's a fun topic. It's very close to my heart.
So cool. What, if you don't mind me asking, what generation do you fit in?
I am a millennial. So I was born in 1990. Yeah. Wait, do you say what year you were born? You don't care.
So I'm at sometimes people say 82, some people say 83. So I'm an 82 girl. And so I've been at that I want to say I relate to Gen X, and then I want to say I'm a millennial. And, especially when you were talking about when millennials were the talk, for some reason, for a while, it was like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with all these millennials in the workforce? Because I was an HR leader at the time, for credibility, I almost wanted to be like, dang, I don't know, because I am I relate to you know what I'm saying? And then
Yes.
as I would go through the constructs of the generation, I was like, nope, that's me. That's where I lie. And even though I'm on the line there, it makes a ton of sense to me. I've changed jobs every 4 to 5 years. Like I fit all of the stereotypes. But I love that you brought that up, because don't you feel like millennials were the hot topic, but now every generation like brings out these like conundrums in the workforce, and what are we gonna do? And it's like, hey folks, have we not realized this is cyclical? Like every time a
Yes.
new generation comes to bear, we're like, shit fire. What are we going to do with these people?
I saw this quote. I don't ever use it because I can't verify it, which I think it would be hard to verify this quote. But there's this quote that goes around, and it's like Hesiod, 8th century BCE or something. And he's talking about like if we could ever get this new generation, on board. Again, I never verified that that's true, but it's an interesting way to look at generational differences and the fact that they have always been around. We've always been frustrated by the experiences of new generations coming in. And we're never not going to be, because those generations are raised in different worlds. They have different norms. They have different societies that tell them what's possible, what's not possible. And the conflict happens where that's different, where a generation it gets something or experiences something that another generation didn't have or didn't experience. And then we measure what's right or wrong based on our own experience versus like what's possible, what's actually possible here, not what do I think is right or wrong. And whenever I talk about it, that's why I love the Venn diagram for culture, because it fits so well into generational differences. We can say, okay, so if our culture is what we say is important, our missions and our values, our systems and our processes, and then our people, how we hold each other accountable. If we see a behavior, let's say a behavior comes in and one that I've heard before is Gen Z wore a hat to a client meeting. And so then I say, let's look at the Venn diagram. Do we say that you can't wear hats in meetings? Do we write it? Is there a system or a process for it? Is it in the employee handbook? And then if it is, do we actually hold people accountable for it? And most of the time it's no, we don't say it because we just assume that people should know it. No, we don't write it because we've never had to write it before. And I don't hold them accountable because they should just know. And reality is we can't. No, they don't just know. Gen Z didn't grow up in a world where hats were synonymous with respect. They grew up in a world where it said, wear whatever you want, So that's a really good picture of how I would even use that with generational differences is you can't just assume that people know what your culture is. We have to teach them what the culture is.
Yeah, it makes me think of like when I was growing up, conservative household, farm kid. And so being a female, most of the women around me were stay-at-home moms and, would make meals for the farm and then raise the children. And usually it was a lot of children. My parents tried to have a lot of children and just had some complications. And so they ended up with two of us. But I always had this feeling that like I was supposed to be quieter than I was. I was supposed to be a boy really to help on the farm. And so, my voice, while I had one outside the home, inside the home, it was like I tried to tamp it down as much as I could. And so now I've got this son, and I've always told myself, like, I'm going to be curious about what he thinks. And I've got two stepdaughters, and same deal, especially my 22-year-old. She just enlightens me all the time with what she's reading and what she's interested in. But I take this curious approach with them, and they blow my mind every time I allow myself to really get curious about what they're capable of or what they're interested in or what keeps them up at night and things like that, and really give them the space to like untangle that. I'm always like, you're incredible, and you're playing with a different deck of cards than I had. And I was just talking to somebody the other day, but I was telling Keegan, my son, like, you're at such a cool place because mental health for leaders is going to be just main stage for you, like non-negotiable. You are not going to be able to be an unhealthy leader as you get older, because like this is just it's becoming common practice, especially for their age category. And I was like, Keegan, the leadership that you will be under will be more transparent, will be more in touch, will be more welcoming, safer. I mean, that's my hope and that's my belief for this younger generation, because of the access that they have, because of the conversations that are happening, because of the tools and resources that are coming to place. And so I get excited. I don't feel apprehensive for this younger generation. I feel excited for what they'll bring to the table. And as I'm getting older, like, I hope they teach me, I've got like things to shed from my past.
Yes. I wish all of us had that perspective. I don't think we do. I think we're getting it. I think the more conversations I have around generational differences with leaders is it feels like there's an openness. It feels like there's an understanding, especially when we do. It's very hard to dispute whenever we lay out the experiences of each generation to then say, so could you see how that would create this on the other side? And then it's like, oh, but that's the problem is we don't go deeper than what we see. We just decide right or wrong whether or not what I see or how someone is attacking a decision or making doing something on the other side, problem solving, whether or not it fits with my experience. We don't go deeper into what could have influenced this experience, what could have created this on the other side, because there's worlds that shaped all of us. And I love the one that is shaping I love it. I feel like the conversations around mental health, their quickness to rethink things, which I think is largely because of their access to information. They have information faster and more readily available than any other generation ever has. And I feel like that's going to do such cool things on the other side.
Yeah, it's exciting to me. And
Mm.
plus, like, they're going to get older and become leaders anyway. So I'd rather sit in the seat where I'm cheering for them and excited than feeling nervous and all angsty. Like, that doesn't feel good. Let's go ahead and cheer them
Yes.
on and give them what they need.
Let's reap the benefits of it.
Serious. Yeah, because it's going to happen regardless. They're going to become the leaders. They're going to become the business owners. It's going to happen. So, what are some of the common challenges that you're seeing with your client work when they're trying to improve their culture, and how are you helping them overcome those issues?
Love this question because I feel like instantly you're going to be like, me too. And it is 100% in leadership development. It's giving their middle management leaders the tools that they need to not only lead the role, lead the work, but lead the person in it too. So I would say that's the biggest challenge is getting some of the work off of the plates of middle management so that they can actually lead people and aren't fully bogged down by the amount of work that it takes to also be a producer and a leader at the same time, that it's so hard to do both. That's nearly impossible to ask someone to do well both roles. And so I think that the people piece of having those conversations around how do we lead the character, lead the person, that's the biggest challenge that I think people are seeing. And that's where most of the conflict comes up. It's very rarely in this person's not working and I don't know how to get them to work. It's like my team is navigating trust issues, my team is navigating conflict, and I need to help them navigate it, but I don't even know how. I don't know how we got here in the first place. And most of the times it can be avoided with really solid leadership development, like really solid learning, conversations, coaching for your leaders that are in that middle management role that so often get the work and the leadership responsibility.
Gosh, that will preach all day long, because middle managers, all the data points that I see, they're suffocating, they're drowning, but yet there are MVPs in our organization. And I love the point that you made about they're working and they're leading. And most of the time, like when I'm doing workforce planning with companies on that like technical side of things, we're taking a look at, especially right now, we're taking a look at the upcoming year and seeing what growth opportunities are and what we're going to need. It's like, okay, we've identified we need a team lead. We've identified that we need a new manager or supervisor, whatever it looks like. My first question is always, which is a hard one to answer, I get, what percentage of time will they be leading the people versus doing their own work? This is a working manager, I'm assuming, hence middle manager, that's where we're sitting. So are we at a 50-50? Are we at a 70-30? Are we at a 30-70? Like, let's be realistic with this person. And then we have to be realistic with the expectations of the person based on that percentage of time. I think what we want is 100-100 from our middle managers. We want them to be the stud that they were in their role before. And then we want them to teach the other people how to be the stud in the role that they were before. And we want it all. And we're hurting these folks, these top performers in our organization.
And I love that because I think so much of the middle management role can be attributed to retention. Companies are losing people quickly because most people don't leave companies, they leave people, right? So they're running into conflict with their leaders. I've been that person. I've left a company because I just could not connect with my leader. I wasn't feeling safe. I wasn't feeling seen, definitely not feeling seen. And I was not connected to the work I was doing anymore, largely because of the relationship I had with my leader. And so it's funny because I feel like so often the conversation is we have to have these leaders doing because it costs us money if we don't. But the reality is I would be curious what the data would say is if we looked at it from the perspective of what if it's costing you money because they are working so much? What if it's costing you money because they're not fully focused on their people? I would put money on if a company fully invested in middle management. And that goes beyond just, giving the person responsibilities, giving them responsibilities outside of leading. It goes even to the root of promoting people that are good leaders, not necessarily just promoting doers. Because that's so often the problem too, is we promote someone that's a rock star at the job and that's what fuels them and that's what they're good at. And then we just automatically assume that that's going to make a good leader, whenever in reality, you could have someone on a team that's not the biggest producer, but they're a better leader. And finding the people that can lead and motivate people and care for people and putting those in those roles. But that goes into a whole other conversation of how do we motivate people? Because I know we often use leadership positions as a motivation, but really it should be a tool to keep your company running. It should be a tool to save you money.
Yeah. Okay. So Bamboo HR, SHRM, Gallup, one of y'all listening, let's run that research so that way we can empower leaders to let their people lead. Yeah. Gosh, I love that. So how do you feel like, what role does leadership play in shaping and sustaining that positive workplace culture? We're kind of touching on that here, but let's get a little more specific about it.
Yeah, so I don't think a culture is ever fully on a leader. I think that a culture that the leader is the line between what does the company say we want our culture to be and then what do the people want. So they're the person that has the quickest line to their people. They can understand what do they need, what is, an organization that they want to work for. They get to influence the organization from the perspective of they get to advocate for their people, but then also tell the story of the organization down to the people. So they're not necessarily building the culture, but it is hinging on them. They're the middleman for most of it. And that's why, a company that I worked for, they had a full culture department. And the culture department was like the party planners. It was the, do we send emails, doing the fun videos. And when I was in learning and development, whenever I was with all of these teams and with these leaders, I was looking at it and I was like, man, leadership development is culture development. Because if you're developing your leaders and you're pouring into them and you're teaching them soft skills, teaching them how to navigate conflict, teaching them how trust is built and how to teach their teams these really important norms that you need in successful cultures, you have to be able to develop that. You have to pour into that. And so that was a big question I had is why are we calling culture the fun stuff whenever culture is, quite frankly, leadership development? It's how well your leaders do their job and how quickly your people can feel the work that they've been doing, because it should impact everything. Leadership development should impact everything.
Yeah. And most leaders would say, I want a culture of accountability. Most leaders wouldn't say, I want the funnest culture ever. Sure, like fun feels good, but most leaders would be like, yeah, I want to have a culture of accountability. I want to have a culture of performance. I want to have a culture of clarity. And you're right, that is leadership development, but I've never heard anybody explain it like that. Well said.
It's so tricky because I think I use the cupcake analogy. We think that like the fun stuff, the nap pods, the snacks, we think all of that is culture, but really all of that is like icing on a cupcake. No one wants to eat only icing. That's a lie. I do love icing. To be honest with you, that is the only part of the cookie. So my analogy kind of does fail with me only, but you have to have something to put the icing on. So the culture is the cupcake. Like the culture is the actual cake of it. And if you don't have people, if you don't have leaders, if you don't have conflict management, if you don't have accountability, you have nothing for all of that to really be sweet. Like all of it tastes transactional at that point, because then it's just a band-aid on bigger things, Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. You hear people starting to say things like, stop giving me another t-shirt and just pay me more money. Treat me like I'm valuable. You start hearing sassy comments like that. And it's heartbreaking
Yeah.
because you and I have both said in HR cultures where it's like, no, don't be entitled. Like, no, be grateful for this. But it's like you get the sentiment. What they're saying is, I don't feel valued here. I don't feel, what'd you say, safe, seen, and connected. I don't feel those things. So now this feels like total lip service and it feels like a fraud, honestly. It
Yeah.
starts to feel really icky, even though it's meant to be a blessing. It's really sad.
Totally. Couldn't have said it better.
Very bummer. Okay, so you talked about, when you're engaging with a client and you're like, what behaviors are we trying to see and how will these stick? So how do you ensure that changes to improve culture are sustainable in the long term?
So anytime I work with a company, they know like I don't want to come in and it be one and done. So I'll always offer something on the other side. So for example, one company I worked for in Des Moines, they wanted feedback training. And so it could have been very easy that I came in and just here's feedback. But we talked about, okay, we want this to be passed to me. You want a culture of feedback. That means I can't be the one that's saying it. We have to create some lasting resonance with this conversation. And so what we did was we sent all of their leaders through the training. And once their leaders had gone through it, we gave the leaders homework. And the next month we met with them again and we said, what did you notice? What were some of the things that were hard to see this through? What were some of the barriers? So we could work with those leaders really intentionally on, okay, now that we're seeing this, now here's another layer that we want you to add in. And all of that was so that whenever I spoke to the entire company, a month and a half later, their leaders were already on board. Their leaders were already bought into this conversation. They were already doing the things that I was asking them to do. And then on the other side of the training, I got to send an email to the leaders and say, now here's what you do. You already have this topic. Your people have it now. I want you to host a meeting in the next 2 weeks. Ask them what they thought of it. Ask them, here's a bunch of questions. Where could you see this being hung up in our department? Where do you think our opportunity is? How can we get feedback? And that way the last word is literally with the leaders, because I call myself a steward of information. I can bring information to any team, but I am not going to be the one that implements it. It has to be literally implementable by your people. And so I always close it with, if it's a group of leaders, here's your next step. Here's what you should do to keep this conversation going.
Good. Good. That is helpful. What role does employee feedback play in shaping and evolving a company's culture?
Oh, man. Well, I think it is your company culture in so many ways. If you're building a culture that isn't for people, then you're building a culture that's for a product. You're building a culture that it's for something that's not living and breathing. So if you aren't getting feedback from your people, then what are you building your culture on? It's probably based on what you think. It's probably based on your own perspective. There has to be some type of information coming from the people doing the work, because those are the boots on the ground. Those are the people that are quickest to see opportunities, quickest to see trends, and also quickest to tell you whether or not you're a company that other people want to work for. Because if the people that are in your business don't want to work for you, you're probably going to get other people in there that are going to learn that they don't want to work for you either. So I like to think of feedback in the realm of, like, if there's a fire in a house, we got to know where the fire started. And I think in the conversation of feedback, we often think like surveys are the best way to do it, that we send out a survey, we get, employee feedback on a survey. The surveys are smoke detectors. Surveys tell you that there is a fire in the house. They're probably not going to tell you where the fire started. They're probably not going to tell you that your kitchen is literally on fire. It's just going to say, hey, there's a fire in here. Call the fire department, man. And so I think you have to have feedback, but it has to be beyond just asking people to fill out a Survey Monkey. You have to teach people how to give and get feedback. That way, that instant feedback on what our company could be doing to make a healthier, a safer, more connected culture isn't put off until that survey goes out on January 1.
Yeah, that's good feedback. That survey, if you're going to do the bare minimum, the survey needs to happen, but it's not enough. Yeah, I
Yes,
agree with that.
100%.
So let's say I'm a company listening to this podcast and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to start focusing on our culture and being more intentional. What advice would you give that company who's just starting out?
I would say start talking to your leaders, start talking about what challenges they're facing with their people, what challenges are they facing with leading not only the job, but the person, and then ask them what they need. What do they need more of on the other side? And I think that there has to be a longer conversation than just like, tell me what you need, because the leader's probably going to say, I need more people. I need more, resources. I need more fill in the blank, because that's the language that they know how to speak. And so there has to be, I would say, a facilitated conversation. I know you do strategic planning. Like, get someone in if you want to really talk about what's actually going on and where you want to go. I think oftentimes someone from outside the room can help create like a non-biased, safe space to do that, to even one, understand where we're starting from, and then two, to paint a picture together where they want to go. Because I think it could be just as simple as listen. It's not could be. It is as simple as just listening to people, just listening, and then thinking outside of the box from what feels comfortable to me to what does this place need people wise? What do we need in order to create a place that people want to work? Like, you can have a ton of work coming in, but if you don't have the people that want to do the work and that aren't motivated in your walls, then you've got a problem. So it starts with listening to what people need. And I think that that has to start with your leaders, getting them in a room and just starting a conversation.
So true.
What would
I
you
love the
say
line of
though?
work
I
that
want
you're
to hear what you would say, because you would do this would be you too.
Yeah, to add on to the listening, I would say that creating a space and a feeling that you really do want to listen. And if you've got an organization that folks don't feel when trust is low, you know what I mean? Trust is low. And so now I'm asking you for feedback, and it's like, I'm going to share with you my final 10%. Like, I'm actually looking for another job. So now I'm not even going to like engage in this process. So there's just so much that goes into that. I am a huge proponent of like looking at that trust component and figuring out, do our individuals trust themselves to do the job? Do they feel equipped, clear expectations? Then that's those HR foundations of like the clear job posting, the clear job description, the clear performance reviews, like all of the clarity around that. Do they know how to succeed in the role? That foundation, if that's there, okay, they've got the self-trust in the role. So now do we have like company trust that's low? Is it team trust? Is it leadership trust? Like, where is the breakdown? So we can actually address it, because there's been plenty of times where I've been on a team and I've been like, hey, I care, I'm the leader and I care. And it's like, yeah, you're not the issue. You can't even fix the issue. The issue is this. And that feels so hopeless, as a leader, to be like, oh my gosh, it's the executive team, or it's, the way we're presenting the culture, or whatever it is. There's a number of things that impact it, but making sure that you've got a safe space for employees where they really feel like you actually care about how they feel, because otherwise they're going to share the BS. You know what I mean? They're going to be like, sometimes the stalls run out of toilet paper. Like, okay, that's not, you know what I mean? They're going to share the stuff that doesn't really matter. I don't think that my trash gets emptied weekly. They're going to share those things that are safe things to share. And if that's what's coming out of your employee's mouth, danger. You are in danger.
Couldn't have said it better. I love it.
Thank you. Well, I didn't know I was going to talk about toilet paper, but here we are.
I didn't know I was going to talk about cupcakes, but here we are. And my love of icing. What's wrong with me?
When we get off of this recording, I am 100%. I've got leftover 50th wedding anniversary cake of my parents, and it was like a wedding cake maker. And I have got a slice left, and I'm sharing some things with my parents, but this is for me. And so I'm about to eat like a gold foiled flower when I get off of here on some white wedding cake.
I love that.
So I'm jealous. She said cupcake. I was like,
I'm gonna eat some cake.
Yes.
I love
gold
that.
foiled. I'm all like, oh, I don't eat dyes and I don't know. You give me a gold foiled flower on top of a wedding cake, I'm eating it.
Absolutely. That, and
I'm eating
we've
it.
talked about this, nachos at a ballpark. I don't care
Oh,
what. I don't care
yeah.
if I'm gluten free. If they're flour, I'm eating them.
Mhm.
Fake cheese, 100%. Yeah, there are some of those things that even, a really solid lifestyle can't keep you from.
Yeah, no, I don't care if this doesn't need to be refrigerated and shelf stable for 17 years. Like this orange cheese product is for me. You heat that up a little bit, it is for me.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, before we wrap, anything else that you'd like to share, circle back on, tell us how the folks can find you, give us all the information.
Yeah, you can find me hello at Sage Culture Co. is our email, www.sagecultureco.com. Why do we say W? I don't have to say www. That's a very millennial thing to do. Did you hear me? www. Oh my gosh, sagecultureco.com. And then, yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. Most of those are at Sage Culture Co. Or you can find me, Brandy Spurling, on any of those as well.
Yeah, I was wwwing on my like graphics for my social media when I was doing all of those myself before I got a marketing coordinator. And Kristen Brown at Hoot Design Company, bless her heart, she was like, "Hey, just you're doing really great work. I love what you're doing, and the consistency is great. Drop the www
Yes.
dot, please." Like, I was like, "Oh shoot, it's not even a clickable link. Why was I doing that?"
I
So
don't I
weird.
don't know why we do it. Maybe it's because I sometimes I think it looks better, maybe. But I also, yeah, there's only one World Wide Web, for the love of, did we think there was gonna be more? Is that why did we do www? Why did we need that? Oh well, whatever.
I definitely had like dial up in my parents' kitchen because my parents were scared, computers, like that's terrifying. Someone's going to obviously steal us and all the people and all the money that we have in our little farmhouse. So the computer, the one computer we had was in the kitchen and it was, like dialing up, and old habits die hard. Like
Old
that
habits
was
die
the
hard.
entrance of the World Wide Web. I remember the entrance.
It's
I
true.
was around.
www. Oh, we're such millennials. I love it. Thank you
I
so much for
know.
having me. This was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah. It was so good to have you. And folks, we appreciate you listening in today. And we know that diving into the intricacies of how your employees feel and whether or not they are safe, seen, and connected in your business can feel like chaos. That work is complicated, but there are skilled professionals out there that are here to help. And the work is totally worth it when it comes to these people that are inside of your business coming alongside you every single day. So don't waste the chaos, embrace it. Till next time.